Millionaire marries a fake bride to soothe his dying mother. But her one rule changes everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. On a brisk autumn morning in New York City, Alexander Pierce walked through the marble lobby of his corporate headquarters. At just 32 years old, he had built one of the most powerful investment firms on Wall Street. His suits were tailored in Milan, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his name alone could make markets shift. To the outside world, he was untouchable, cold, calculating, and entirely consumed by success. But at home, behind the doors of his family's penthouse overlooking Central Park, there was a very different reality. His mother, Margaret Pierce, the woman who had once been the heart of glittering charity galas and elegant family holidays, was now confined to a hospital bed in the master suite. Her voice had grown weaker each day, yet her mind remained sharp, and her heart carried only one final wish: to see her only son happily married before she left this world. Alexander had tried to argue. He told her marriage could wait, that business demanded his focus, that there would be time later. But Margaret would only smile sadly, her frail hand gripping his with surprising strength. "There is no later, my darling boy. What I want most is to see you loved and cared for. Do not let me leave this life worrying about you." Those words haunted him every night. He could provide her with the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and every comfort money could buy, but he could not give her the one thing she longed for: a daughter-in-law at her side. That was when the desperate idea formed. If he could not find real love in time, perhaps he could at least give his mother the illusion of it: a wedding, a bride, a performance convincing enough to bring her peace in her final days. But where does a billionaire find a woman willing to play such a role? Not among the polished socialites who gossiped behind champagne glasses. Not among the ambitious women who had once pursued his fortune. He needed someone real, someone outside his ruthless world of wealth and deals. That someone was about to enter his life by accident. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 26, an art teacher at a struggling public school in Brooklyn. Her clothes were modest, her paycheck barely enough to cover her younger brother's medical bills, but her spirit was fierce. She had a spine of steel hidden beneath her gentle smile, and a sense of dignity that no hardship could crush. Their paths crossed in the most unassuming place, a quiet cafe near the hospital where Margaret was treated. Alexander had stopped in for black coffee, trying to clear his mind, when he overheard Emily arguing softly with the cashier. Her card had declined. She insisted on paying for a simple sandwich, her voice trembling with both embarrassment and determination. "Please, just let me keep it. My brother has not eaten since yesterday. I will come back tomorrow with the money." Alexander watched, frozen. Here was a woman who had nothing, yet her entire focus was on caring for someone else. In that moment, something stirred in him, not pity, not condescension, but a recognition. This was the kind of selflessness his mother admired. This was the kind of woman who could stand beside him, not as a real bride perhaps, but as a believable one. He stepped forward, paid for her meal without hesitation, and left his business card on the counter before walking out. Emily stared after him, confused and wary. Why would a stranger, let alone a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Fortune magazine, do such a thing? The next day, when she called the number on the card, Alexander made his proposition. His tone was cool, almost transactional, but his words were shocking. "I need a bride, not a real one. A temporary arrangement, strictly professional. You will be compensated generously, and all you must do is play the role in front of my mother." Emily nearly hung up the phone. The idea sounded outrageous, even insulting. But then Alexander added the detail that stopped her cold. The payment would be enough to cover her brother's surgery, the one she had been fighting for months to afford. Silence stretched across the line. Her heart pounded. Was she truly considering this? Pretending to be the wife of a man she had just met, a man whose life was galaxies away from her own? It was madness. It was a lie. Yet it might be the only way to save the person she loved most. Finally, Emily whispered, "If I agree, there will be one rule. You do not cross into my personal life. No touching, no pretending, beyond what your mother must see. I will not lose myself in your world, no matter how much you pay me." Alexander paused, then said simply, "Agreed." Neither of them realized it then, but that single rule would become the very thing to change everything. The contract was drawn up within a week. It was not a flowery wedding invitation or a romantic promise. It was 12 pages of legal clauses, drafted by Alexander's personal attorney. The language was precise, detached, and cold. To Emily, it felt more like signing a business loan than agreeing to play the role of a wife. Yet when she held the pen, her hand trembled. This was not only ink on paper. This was her brother's chance at life, her family's only hope. She signed, steadying her voice, as she repeated her rule once more. "One boundary, no invasion of my personal life. We keep this arrangement strictly for your mother's sake." Alexander gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Understood." "Oh." From that moment, their two worlds collided. The transformation began quickly. Within days, Emily was measured for gowns by designers she had only read about in magazines. Silk, lace, and jewels were draped across her shoulders, while assistants whispered about how radiant she looked. For the first time in her life, she saw herself reflected in mirrors taller than the walls of her apartment, and the image staring back felt like a stranger. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private ballroom on the Upper East Side. Golden chandeliers glittered overhead, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Emily entered on Alexander's arm, her nerves burning beneath the flawless makeup. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, wealthy guests judging every detail. She was not one of them, and she knew it. But then she felt his grip tighten around her hand. Alexander leaned slightly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "They do not matter. Just smile for my mother." Her gaze followed his to the head of the table. Margaret Pierce sat in a wheelchair, her frail frame wrapped in a shawl of soft cashmere. Her eyes, though dim with illness, lit up at the sight of Emily. For the first time in weeks, a smile spread across Margaret's face. Emily's heart softened instantly. Whatever charade this was, it was worth it for that smile. The next day, the ceremony was staged in the private chapel of a hospital. Doctors and nurses discreetly lined the back rows, while a priest conducted the vows. Emily wore ivory silk, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Alexander stood beside her, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. When the priest asked Alexander if he would take Emily to be his lawfully wedded wife, he answered with a calm, "I do." Emily's turn came, and for a moment, her throat closed. The words stuck. She reminded herself, "This is not real. This is for Margaret." Finally, she whispered, "I do." The applause was quiet but heartfelt. Margaret wept openly, clutching tissues in her frail hands. "My son," she whispered, "you have made me the happiest mother alive." That night, after the staged reception and a series of carefully posed photographs for the society pages, Emily found herself inside Alexander's penthouse. The city glittered beneath the windows like a million stars. She felt out of place, like a borrowed ornament dropped into another world. Alexander poured 2 glasses of champagne, then set one in front of her. His voice was calm, almost distant. "The contract begins now. Appearances in public, hospital visits, and family events. Beyond that, we remain separate. Your privacy will be respected." Emily nodded, lifting the glass but not drinking. "And my rule still stands." "Yes," Alexander replied. His eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, then shifted away. "Your rule stands." "No." The silence that followed was thick, a fragile balance between two strangers bound by duty rather than love. Yet beneath it, something unspoken had begun to stir, like a spark hidden under layers of stone, waiting for the first breath of air to ignite. Neither of them admitted it, but the lines between contract and reality were already beginning to blur. Living together under the same roof proved far more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Alexander's penthouse was immaculate, polished marble floors reflecting the glow of modern chandeliers, every detail curated by interior designers. Emily, however, moved through the space as if she were walking on glass. She placed her coffee cup down too softly, folded blankets with too much care, and avoided lingering in rooms that felt more like showpieces than a home. The first week tested her resolve. At breakfast, the staff served omelets crafted by a French chef, arranged with precision on porcelain plates. Emily, who was used to oatmeal or toast on hurried mornings, felt awkward picking up the silverware. She whispered thank yous to the staff, only to notice how they glanced at her with polite curiosity. To them, she was a stranger suddenly elevated into their employer's inner circle. Alexander, by contrast, remained calm, almost indifferent. He skimmed the morning financial pages while sipping black coffee, barely acknowledging the tension. Yet his eyes, sharp and observant, occasionally lifted to watch her when she thought he was not looking. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at the school, Emily returned to the penthouse, still carrying art supplies smudged on her hands. She tried to slip quietly past the living room, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "You are late," he said, his tone cool but not unkind. "My mother asked for you." Emily froze, guilt pressing against her chest. "I had a class project to finish. The children needed me." For the first time, his expression shifted. The corners of his mouth softened, as though he recognized something in her words. "Children first. That sounds like something my mother would say. Go to her. She has been waiting." Emily hurried to Margaret's room, where the older woman sat with a stack of family photo albums. Margaret welcomed her warmly, pulling her close. "Tell me, dear, how did you and Alexander meet? Was it fate? Did he sweep you off your feet?" The question pierced Emily like a blade. She forced a smile, weaving a gentle lie about a chance meeting in the city. Alexander appeared in the doorway just then, listening quietly, his expression unreadable. Emily's cheeks burned. He had asked her to play the role, but it was in these moments, looking into Margaret's hopeful eyes, that the weight of deception felt unbearable. Later that night, Emily stepped onto the balcony for air. The city stretched endlessly below, a sea of lights flickering against the darkness. She whispered to herself, "What have I done?" To her surprise, Alexander joined her. He stood silently beside her, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the skyline. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, in a rare softness, he said, "You make her happy. That is all that matters right now." Emily turned to him, her voice trembling. "And what about when she realizes none of this is real? What happens then?" His jaw tightened, but his eyes revealed a flicker of vulnerability. "Then I will bear that burden, not you." The words hung between them, heavy yet strangely comforting. For the first time, Emily saw not just the billionaire who commanded boardrooms, but a son desperate to give his dying mother peace. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew more layered. At social events, Alexander guided her with a hand at her back, whispering cues so she would not falter in front of society's elite. At home, he allowed small glimpses of humanity, an amused smile when she burned toast, a sigh of fatigue when he loosened his tie after midnight meetings. Emily found herself noticing details she had promised to ignore: the way his eyes softened when he spoke to his mother, the quiet patience in his voice when he asked about her students, the rare laughter that slipped out when she teased him about his perfectly organized closet. But with each passing day, she also felt the walls closing in. The lie grew heavier, and her rule, the one boundary she had demanded, began to blur. She had sworn not to let him into her personal life, not to cross the line between performance and truth. Yet her heart betrayed her, beating faster each time their eyes met, each time his hand brushed hers in public. Neither of them admitted it, but the arrangement was no longer just an arrangement. The contract had set the stage, but the play was beginning to turn into something dangerously real. Autumn shifted into winter, and with it came a series of obligations that tested the fragile balance between contract and reality. The Pierce family's annual charity gala was one of the most anticipated events of the season. It was an evening filled with wealth, power, and the sharp scrutiny of society's elite. For Emily, it felt like stepping onto a stage she had never rehearsed for. The night of the gala, she stood before the mirror in a gown of midnight blue satin, the fabric flowing like water around her. Diamonds sparkled at her ears, borrowed from Margaret's personal collection. Emily had never worn anything so exquisite, yet beneath the glamour her stomach twisted with dread. She reminded herself that this was all a performance. She was here to play the part of Alexander's devoted wife. When Alexander appeared at her door in a tailored tuxedo, the air shifted. His presence was commanding, his every step deliberate. For a moment, Emily forgot the lines she had practiced, her breath catching as he extended his arm. "Shall we?" he asked, his voice low, formal, but with a trace of warmth hidden beneath. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and golden drapes, tables adorned with roses and crystal. Cameras flashed as guests turned to admire the powerful young millionaire and his mysterious bride. Whispers followed them. Who is she? Where did she come from? Emily felt the weight of every stare, but Alexander guided her with steady confidence. He leaned close, whispering, "Just smile. Let them see what they want to see." The evening unfolded with introductions to investors, politicians, and socialites. Emily answered questions politely, though her accent and modest background slipped through at times. Some guests raised eyebrows, others exchanged knowing looks, as if they sensed something unusual about this sudden marriage. Then came the sharpest test. At the edge of the dance floor stood Cassandra Blake, Alexander's former fiancée, a woman of striking beauty and icy composure. Cassandra approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Alexander," she purred, "I had no idea you remarried so quickly, and this must be your bride." Her gaze traveled over Emily, lingering with calculated disdain. Emily's cheeks burned, but before she could speak, Alexander's hand tightened around hers. "Yes," he said firmly, "this is my wife, and I would appreciate if you showed her the respect she deserves." The words stunned Cassandra, her smile faltering. For Emily, the defense struck deeper than expected. It was not scripted, not part of the contract. It was real. Later that night, after polite dances and staged laughter, Emily slipped away to the terrace to catch her breath. The city below glittered in the cold night air, but her thoughts spun with confusion. This was supposed to be pretend. Why had his words affected her so strongly? Alexander soon found her, his expression unreadable. He offered his coat, draping it gently over her shoulders. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. Emily shook her head. "I do not belong here. They all know it. I can feel it." His gaze softened, just for a moment. "Let them think what they want. You belong here as much as anyone. More, perhaps, because you are real." The sincerity in his tone unsettled her. For weeks she had built walls, reminding herself of the rule, the contract, the line that could not be crossed. But standing beneath the city lights with his coat wrapped around her, those walls began to crack. When they returned to the penthouse that evening, Emily found herself lying awake, replaying his words. She reminded herself that this was still a lie, a performance for Margaret, for the public, for appearances. Yet her heart refused to obey reason. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his study long past midnight, staring at the flickering skyline. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and faced down ruthless rivals without hesitation. But now, in the quiet of his own home, he was unsettled by something far more dangerous. The possibility that his fake marriage was becoming the most real thing in his life. Neither of them slept easily that night. Both were haunted by the same unspoken truth. This was no longer just about Margaret's peace or society's expectations. This was about them, and neither knew what to do with that growing fire between duty and desire. The weeks following the gala were a blur of appearances, whispered conversations, and carefully maintained illusions. To the outside world, Alexander and Emily were a picture of elegance and unity. Inside the penthouse, however, the air was heavy with tension. Neither dared to name. It was during a crisp January morning that the first cracks began to widen. Emily was walking down Fifth Avenue after visiting Margaret at the hospital when she felt eyes on her. She glanced back and noticed a man trailing her with a camera hidden beneath his coat. Panic surged through her veins. She quickened her pace, weaving through the crowd, but the man persisted. By the time she ducked into a bookstore to lose him, her hands were trembling. That evening, Alexander confronted her with photographs splashed across a gossip website. The headline read, "Mystery Bride Spotted Alone. Is the Pierce marriage already falling apart?" Emily stared at the glowing screen, her throat tightening. "I was only walking home. I did nothing wrong." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice sharp but not directed at her. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through the article. "This is Cassandra's doing. She wants to expose you. To expose us." Emily's heart sank. She had feared this moment since the beginning. "If they discover the truth, your reputation will be ruined. And your mother," He cut her off firmly. Do not think about that. Let me handle it. Days later, the danger escalated. At a charity luncheon, Cassandra cornered Emily in the ladies' lounge. Her words were venom wrapped in silk. You think you can fool everyone with your little act? We both know you are not his wife. You are just a poor girl playing dress-up. When I reveal the truth, he will drop you, and you will be nothing again. Emily stood frozen, her pulse racing. But then she remembered Alexander's defense at the gala, the way he had spoken with conviction. Gathering her courage, she met Cassandra's glare. Believe what you want, but he chose me. That is what matters. Cassandra's smile was cold as she swept out, leaving Emily shaken but oddly stronger. That night, Alexander found Emily pacing in the penthouse. She tried to hide her distress, but he saw through it instantly. What did she say to you? Emily hesitated, then confessed. She threatened to expose us. She knows. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then, without warning, he crossed the room and took her hands in his. His voice was steady, filled with quiet intensity. Let her try. I will not let anyone humiliate you, not while I am alive. Emily's breath caught, the firmness in his tone, the warmth in his grip. It was not the voice of a man protecting a contract. It was the voice of a man protecting something far more personal. The following week, the pressure mounted. Paparazzi lurked outside the penthouse. Rumors spread like wildfire. Every public outing became a battlefield of flashing cameras and whispered accusations. Through it all, Alexander remained at Emily's side, his hand always finding hers, his presence a shield against the storm. One evening, after escaping a particularly ruthless swarm of photographers, they stumbled into the penthouse foyer, breathless. Emily leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling. This is madness. I cannot keep living like this. Alexander stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. Then let us change it. No more hiding, no more pretending. Her heart pounded. What are you saying? He hesitated, the weight of unspoken words pressing between them. Finally, he whispered, I am saying that somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. I know this was supposed to be a contract, but it does not feel like one anymore. Not to me. Silence stretched, thick and trembling. Emily's rule echoed in her mind, the one boundary she had set so firmly. Yet here, in this moment, it felt like the ground beneath her had shifted entirely. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if this marriage, born of desperation and deception, had become something real? The storm finally broke on a bitter February night. Snow flurries swept across the city, coating the sidewalks in silver. Inside the penthouse, Emily sat curled on the sofa, staring at her phone. The gossip columns had reached a fever pitch. Articles speculated about her past, her finances, even her family. A headline blared, Is the Pierce bride a fraud? Emily's heart pounded as she scrolled through the hateful comments. Strangers mocked her clothes from earlier photographs, questioned her education, and sneered at the idea of a schoolteacher marrying into billions. Each word felt like a dagger. When Alexander returned home, he found her pale and silent, her eyes glassy from hours of scrolling. He took the phone from her hands and tossed it onto the table with a sharp gesture. Do not read that poison. They do not know you. They do not matter. Her voice cracked. But they are not wrong, Alexander. I do not belong here. I am not your world. Every day this gets harder to pretend. He crouched before her, his hand reaching gently for hers. His voice dropped, raw and steady. Listen to me. You are stronger than they will ever understand. You have given my mother peace. You have stood by me when you had every reason to walk away. That makes you more than worthy of this life. And if anyone dares to say otherwise, they answer to me. Before she could respond, the shrill ring of his phone sliced through the room. Alexander glanced at the caller ID, his expression hardening. It is the board of directors. They want an emergency meeting. Hours later, Emily waited alone in the penthouse, the city lights flickering through the windows. When Alexander finally returned near dawn, exhaustion shadowed his features. He poured himself a drink and sank into the armchair. They are questioning everything, he said quietly. My leadership, my judgment. Cassandra has been feeding them lies, convincing them this marriage is a scandal that threatens the company's stability. Emily's stomach twisted. I told you this would ruin you. But Alexander only looked at her with burning intensity. "No. The only thing that could ruin me is losing you." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Her heart raced, torn between disbelief and a dangerous hope. For weeks, she had fought to keep her rule intact, to guard her heart from the inevitable collapse. Yet here he was, confessing without hesitation, his walls shattered. The next day, the situation reached its peak. Margaret had insisted on attending a family luncheon at the hospital's private dining hall, eager to be surrounded by loved ones. The room was filled with relatives, business associates, and a handful of reporters discreetly invited to capture a wholesome image of the Pierce legacy. Halfway through the luncheon, Cassandra arrived uninvited, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She carried a folder in her hand, her smile sharp as glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice slicing through the chatter, "I think it is time we speak the truth about this so-called marriage." Hum. Gasps echoed across the room as she opened the folder, revealing photographs, timelines, and documents meant to expose Emily as an imposter. Emily's face drained of color. Her chest tightened as humiliation loomed. But before Cassandra could utter another word, Alexander stood. His hand slammed against the table, the sound reverberating through the hall. His voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "Enough!" All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, shielding Emily with his body. His voice carried the weight of command that had built empires, but now it carried something deeper: love. "This woman is my wife. She has brought light into my mother's final days. She has given me more strength than any of you ever have. And if anyone here doubts her worth, then you doubt me." The room fell silent. Cassandra's confidence faltered as murmurs spread through the crowd. Margaret, her eyes wet with tears, reached for Emily's hand and whispered hoarsely, "Do not let them hurt you, my dear. You are family." In that moment, Emily realized that Alexander's defense was not an act, not a strategy, not part of the contract. It was real. And though fear still twisted in her chest, another truth rose stronger than fear. The life she thought was pretend had already become the most genuine part of her existence. The luncheon ended in tense silence. Cassandra stormed out, her plan to expose Emily shattered by Alexander's defiance. Yet even as the room settled, Emily felt her heart racing, her mind reeling. She had never expected him to risk his reputation, his empire, for her. That evening, back in the penthouse, the weight of unspoken truths pressed heavily between them. Emily stood near the window, staring at the snowy skyline, while Alexander poured 2 glasses of wine. He approached her, holding one out. "You have been quiet since the luncheon." Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the glass. "You should not have done that. You could have lost everything." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Do you not see? I was ready to lose it all. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being part of a contract. You became everything." Emily's breath caught. Her rule, the one boundary she had clung to, echoed in her mind. No invasion of her personal life, no feelings, no crossing lines. And yet, standing here with him, she realized that line had already been erased. She set the glass aside, her hands trembling. "You were never supposed to say that. I was never supposed to feel this way. This was supposed to be pretend." Alexander stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Then tell me it is pretend. Look me in the eyes and tell me you feel nothing." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes, betraying her silence. He lifted a hand, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "You cannot, can you? Because what we have is real." At that moment, the truth could no longer be denied. Emily felt the wall she had built crumble completely. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "I never wanted this to happen, but it did." Alexander leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, his voice raw. "Then let us stop fighting it." Oh. The city outside glowed against the night, but inside the penthouse, a different light burned, fragile, undeniable, and entirely real. For the first time, their hearts were no longer bound by contract or obligation. They were bound by choice. The days following their confession should have been filled with relief, but instead they brought new storms. Cassandra, furious from her public humiliation, redoubled her efforts. Articles appeared almost daily, each dripping with poison. painting Emily as a manipulative opportunist who had trapped Alexander into marriage. The attacks were relentless, and though Alexander's company stood firm behind him, the whispers in high society grew louder. Emily bore the brunt of the cruelty. At the grocery store, strangers recognized her and muttered insults under their breath. On the subway, she caught people staring, whispering into their phones as though she were some sideshow spectacle. Her students at school began hearing rumors, too, and she feared it would affect them. One evening, after another cruel headline splashed across the news, Emily sat alone in the penthouse living room. The silence pressed in around her until she could no longer hold back the tears. When Alexander found her, she was curled on the sofa, her face buried in her hands. "I cannot do this anymore," she whispered. "Your world is too cruel. They will never accept me." Alexander crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her gently into his arms. "Let them talk, let them hate. None of it matters as long as we know the truth." Her voice shook. "But your company, your reputation, your legacy," he interrupted firmly. "What use is a legacy if I destroy the woman I love trying to protect it? I will not sacrifice you for their approval." "Oh." For the first time, he said it plainly. "Love." The words settled between them like a vow, undeniable and irreversible. The turning point came days later at a shareholders' meeting. The board had grown restless, demanding answers, pressing Alexander to either divorce or face removal as CEO. The tension was suffocating as cameras flashed and voices clamored. Emily stood at the back of the room, hidden in the crowd, her heart racing. Then Alexander rose, commanding silence. His voice carried the weight of authority, but also the raw edge of emotion. "You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, this marriage began as something unconventional. But in the middle of lies and rumors, I found the only truth that matters. I love my wife. I will stand by her, whether you approve or not. And if that costs me this company, then so be it." Gasps rippled across the room. Some shareholders looked scandalized, others thoughtful. The press scribbled furiously. But Alexander stood tall, his gaze unwavering, his choice clear. Emily's breath caught as the crowd erupted in debate. For weeks she had doubted, questioned, and feared. Yet here, in the most public, dangerous arena of his life, he had chosen her openly. No contracts, no performances, just love. That night, back at the penthouse, she could hardly find the words. She stood before him, her heart trembling. "You would give up everything for me?" Alexander cupped her face gently, his eyes fierce yet tender. "I already have everything. You are everything." The tears that slipped down her cheeks were not from fear this time, but from a joy so overwhelming she could not contain it. For the first time since the day she signed the contract, Emily no longer felt like an imposter. She felt like a wife, his wife. The battle with the world was not over, but the war within their hearts had ended. They had chosen each other, and that choice was stronger than any scandal, stronger than any doubt. What began as a performance for his dying mother had become the truest story either of them had ever lived. Spring arrived in New York, softening the harsh winter with blossoms and gentle rain. But inside the Pierce penthouse, the season brought something even more profound: peace. The noise of scandal slowly began to fade. The board, shaken by Alexander's unwavering declaration, realized that his determination only strengthened the company's image. Investors respected his courage, and the press, hungry for fresh drama, eventually turned their attention elsewhere. For Emily, the truest victory was not in silencing gossip, but in the quiet moments that followed. She no longer walked through the city with her head lowered. She no longer felt like a stranger in Alexander's home. She had discovered her place not through money, not through appearances, but through love that refused to be hidden. Margaret's health, however, continued to decline. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and her strength waned. Yet every time Emily entered her room, Margaret's face brightened. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Margaret took Emily's hand in hers. Her voice was weak, but her eyes shone with warmth. "You were the answer to my prayers," she whispered. "Not because you gave me a wedding to see, but because you gave my son the one thing he could never buy someone who truly loves him." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she squeezed Margaret's hand. Beside her, Alexander bowed his head, his voice breaking as he said, "I promise, Mother, I will cherish her, always." Margaret smiled softly, her breathing shallow. That is all I ever wanted. Hours later, with her son's hand in one and Emily's in the other, Margaret passed peacefully, surrounded by love. The funeral was intimate, elegant, filled with memories of a woman who had given so much to the world. Emily stood by Alexander's side, no longer as a performer in a play, but as the woman he had chosen. The whispers of society no longer mattered. The vows they had once spoken for show now echoed with truth. Weeks later, Alexander surprised Emily by inviting her to a quiet garden on the edge of Central Park. It was not a ballroom filled with glittering lights, nor a staged ceremony with cameras waiting. It was just the two of them, beneath blooming cherry blossoms. He took her hands, his eyes steady. The first time we stood together before a priest, it was a lie. This time, I want it to be real. No contracts, no rules, just us. Emily's breath trembled. But we already said our vows. Alexander smiled faintly. Then let us say them again, and this time mean every word. There, beneath the soft petals drifting like snow, they pledged themselves once more. No papers, no deception, no spectators, only love. As they kissed, Emily thought back to the day she signed that contract, the day she had promised herself to keep her distance. Her one rule had been simple: never let this arrangement touch her heart. Yet now, standing here with Alexander's arms around her, she realized that rule had been the very thing meant to be broken. Because love is not bound by contracts or appearances. Love is proven in action, in sacrifice, in the courage to stand against the world. Their story had begun as a performance, but it ended as a promise of truth, a promise of justice, a promise of forever. And this time, it was real.